The situation on the ground in Gaza remains fraught. Jamil Sawalmeh, ActionAid's Palestine Country Director, normally joins us from the West Bank, but this morning he's with us in the studio. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to see you in Australia.
Thank you so much.
Can you tell us, what is it like in Gaza at the moment?
Well, unfortunately, we're still facing an unprecedented humanitarian crisis despite the ceasefire, which unfortunately did not bring much of a relief to the civilian population in Gaza, where we still have 90% of the civilian population displaced and cornered in 45% of the area of Gaza. And we're still facing major access restriction and systematic obstruction of humanitarian aid and humanitarian aid worker access in Gaza. So unfortunately, the reality there is pretty much still the same in terms of the living conditions of the people and the overall situation, which is extremely difficult to comprehend after having a ceasefire introduced, which now seems like more of a false ceasefire, actually.
Are you seeing, there's been a lot of international discussion about how to reconstruct, how to rebuild Gaza, but are you actually seeing much action on the ground?
Yeah, there has been lots of political and diplomatic engagement. We have seen different bodies being established, different entities being introduced into the context. But at the end of the day, I think it's very difficult to see the impact of that on the ground. It's very difficult to see that the people still continue to suffer while the world is still grappling with the unprecedented humanitarian reality. So yes, unfortunately, we have seen all of that being established. We have seen lots of meetings and discussions happening, but all of these activities and engagements did not yield any sort of positive results for the civilian populations in Gaza so far.
You mentioned that it's still really hard to get aid into Gaza. Can you explain a bit more about that? How are you getting aid in? Are there blockages? Are you able to get enough donations? How is it all happening?
Yes, we had significant amount of aid that piled up at the crossings with Gaza, either through the Egyptian humanitarian corridor or the Jordanian humanitarian corridor. But from the early days of the war, we've seen that Israel systematically obstructed humanitarian aid access into Gaza, and also referring to what was needed in Gaza before the war. We were in need for 600 trucks on a daily basis without the current genocide that happened in Gaza. But currently, we are still under the same conditions, unfortunately. Israel kept changing the policies and procedures for access into Gaza and introduced new measures every time we coordinated humanitarian aid. However, we remain committed to continue to serve because everything we have provided in Gaza was life-saving throughout the war in the past 2.5 years in Gaza.
I just want to ask you about a slightly different issue that has gone onto the radar a bit in Australia. Our major parties oppose the use of the death penalty. Israel has obviously, it's got now two separate different laws that have been going through the parliament there. The latest lot will allow public trials and the death penalty for those involved in the attacks on October 7. More broadly, what are your concerns around the use of capital punishment?
Well, we're deeply concerned because this just further puts Israel in a situation where it continues to practice apartheid, because we have two different sets of laws for two different groups of people who are living on the same land, and this is the death penalty that was introduced recently is not the first law that we consider outrageous and we consider discriminatory. Several other laws were introduced recently, but most concerning about the death penalty is the fact it has direct discrimination towards a specific group of people, and unfortunately we have not seen any sort of safeguards for children, because we know Israel prosecutes children at the age of 12. There are many Palestinian children who are detained in Israeli prisons and who can be also subject to this death penalty as well. And unfortunately it's very concerning because we have a far-right government in Israel now who continues to practice this discriminatory approaches to introducing more and more discriminatory laws.
This day is Nakba. Can you explain what this day means for you? Because we will be seeing a bit of action on that, I think, later today. Can you just explain a bit about that?
Yeah, the Nakba Day is the day when for Palestinians, it's just to mark the disaster that happened in 1948, which also coincided with the creation of the State of Israel. And at that particular day, more than 700,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homeland. in historical Palestine and pushed either to the east to neighboring countries or north to Lebanon and Syria, including my family, who were expelled from the city of Jaffa on the Mediterranean in 1948 and ended up in a refugee camp in the West Bank where I was born and raised. So it's a significant historical event in the life of Palestinians, and Nakba actually means catastrophe in English. So Palestinians still commemorate this day every year to ensure that we don't forget what happened there, and to ensure that there are a significant portion of the Palestinian population still face the injustice and still face displacement and refugee status up until this moment today.
Jamil, it is nice to see you in person. Thank you so much for speaking to us again on News Breakfast.